is August 15th. We are at the Finksburg Library, and we are here with Wilma Welling. So Wilma, tell me about growing up. You grew up on a farm? Your family owns farms?
I grew up on a 101-acre farm about a mile up the road from Finksburg Library. It was on what they called Horseshoe Bend Road at that time, but now it's Bollinger Road, about halfway between Deer Park Road and Old Westminster Pike. I grew up there, as did my father and his father before him. The farm was purchased by my great-grandfather in 1881 from his grandparents, and it was composed of two parcels of land. One was called Buck's Range, and the other one was called Glendowick, and that was deeded from Stephen Winchester in 1791. There's still a stone house on the farm that was shown on a surveyor's map in 1828, and that's where my grandfather grew up. And then they built, when he and my grandmother married, they built a new farmhouse. So my father was Walter Arnold, and my mother was Florence Arnold. Her maiden name was Flor, and her grandfather founded the village of Floresville down in southern Carroll County. And my grandparents, we all, 3 generations lived on the farm. My grandfather was Edward Arnold, and my grandmother was Christiana Bollinger Arnold. So it was all good for a kid growing up on a farm. The only thing I didn't like, I didn't have other kids to play with because I was an only child, but my grandmother filled in. She taught me to jump rope and sew with the treadle sewing machine and pull taffy. And it was all good for kids growing up on a farm, but not so much for the adults. It was very hard work. On the farm we grew corn, hay, barley, wheat, oats. That was mainly for livestock feed. And there were pigs that were sold, and one was butchered each year. Cows, milk cows. The milk was separated in a cream separator, and the cream was sold to a dairy to make butter. My mother raised ducks and chickens, geese, turkeys, and they were dressed for the local trade to eat. I remember being told, and I kind of remember when I was really little and my mother and grandmother wanted me out of the house, my father would take me out and hold him on his lap while he plowed. I'd go to sleep to the hum of the tractor, and then I'd get a little aggravated when he had to come down on the clutch, and it woke me up. And then I wasn't made to really work too much on the farm, so that probably wasn't good, but when the older people were picking tomatoes out in the hot sun, my father would take an army surplus canvas and throw over the end of the wagon, make me a tent, and I'd take the farm dogs and my toys and I'd play under my tent. But then when I was 11 or 12, I started to drive the farm tractor, so I would pull the baler and my father would be on the wagon catching the bales of hay. So I kind of liked to do that. But I think what impressed me as I look back on my growing up time and farm life is how self-reliant farmers were, and I guess they still are. But my father, before I was born, had a windmill and a water wheel that powered a battery that provided electric lights for the farm, or for the barn, way before the public utility came around. He could do anything from shoe a horse to dehorn cattle, to put the ring in their nose, neuter the pigs. And in the wintertime, he'd tear down the farm tractor, overhaul it, give it a fresh coat of gray paint, and he didn't have any parts left over when he was done, so that was all good. And the same way with the women, my mother and grandmother, very self-reliant. They not only helped out in the fields, especially my mother, cooking, sewing. My mother made all of my clothes when I was a little kid, even my coats and my hats. So that's what I remember when I look back, how self-reliant. I mean, when I was little, if it didn't it wasn't grown and preserved and canned and butchered or squeezed from a cow, we didn't eat it. Very little came from a grocery store. Maybe oranges in the winter, sugar, even flour. We took bags of wheat to the mill, and that was ground into flour. And people back then were very self-reliant. They didn't need much from the outside world. And what I didn't understand as a teenager, there was no weekly paycheck. You took the pigs through the auction, you took the calves through the auction, and you had money, or you sold eggs and you had money. You sold the cream and you had money, but it wasn't a weekly thing. So I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to know about the farm.
Well, so when you were growing up, you said you didn't have to work on the farm, but I mean, I'm sure you helped with the canning and things like that. I mean,
Not if I could help it. I got in on some of that stuff, but I really wasn't made to do much farm work unless I wanted to. I had the benefits of living on a farm. I had a riding horse, and I had the puppies and the kittens, and all the little baby animals, the little pigs that weren't doing real well came into the house and were bottle fed, and the little ducks and gooselings. It was pretty much fun, and I really, other than mowing the lawn sometimes around the house, and I really wasn't, except for driving the tractor on occasions. And I would help a little bit in the house, the canning and that type of stuff, but it wasn't what I was made to do, put it this way. But that's what I remember most when I look back, how self-reliant people were. There was very little. Once in a while you had the vet in if you really had a problem. But in most cases they took care of their problems, and very self-reliant lifestyle, I guess.
Now, did you have neighbors and things come over, like during harvest time, and people got
Well,
together?
in my younger days that I barely remember, they would cut the grain, and there was thrashing time. Someone would have the thrasher and bring it around, and then the men would come and help. And then, and of course, my mother and grandmother had to feed them. But then later on, my father got his own thrash machine, and then lo and behold, later on, he bought a combine. So we didn't usually get the things when they first came out. It took it took a while before we got the modern conveniences. But and same way with hay. I mean, when he bought the hay baler, he bought that new, and that was a big deal. And to put that much money in a farm machinery. But and growing up on the farm, I guess our recreational activities, we were active at Deer Park Church, and my father and his father were two of the charter members of Reese Community Volunteer Fire Company, and that was a big part of our life. My mother and grandmother were part of the auxiliary, and we were very active. My father was treasurer for 14 years, so it was a big, and he became a fireman and trained through the University of Maryland program. And that was another thing. Back in the day, the University of Maryland Extension Office was pretty important to the farm families. They provided information, and my mother and grandmother belonged to the local homemakers club, and the extension agent would come out and teach the ladies, although I think maybe these farm ladies knew more than the extension agent did. But I remember my father relying on information from the extension agent. He came out when contour farming to cut down on erosion came around, and he would walk, and my father came behind him with the tractor and the plow to mark the area where the crop should be planted in a contour situation, so it would help with erosion. And like I said, that was an educational avenue for them to learn new. My father was always up for learning something new, so that was a good thing. So,
what are some of the stories that maybe your dad shared with you about his growing up on the farm?
Well, as they all said, they had a long ways to to walk to school. He went to Oak Summit School, which was on Hook Road, which was quite a hike up the road. And I remember him saying, coming home in the wintertime, he could get on his sled and come, you know, really a long distance. And I don't remember the snow ever getting a crust on it that, you know, well that you could go that far. But he was always a lifelong learner, I guess. When I think he only went to 6th grade because that's where the one-room schoolhouse stopped. And he would have to went to Westminster to continue, and that was too far, and besides his father was in ill health, so he was needed on the farm. I don't know, there's stories. I know he would be out in the field working, and maybe before I was born, I guess, that the farm dogs were a big park collie or whatever they might have been, and he always needed a drink of water, so they would have these little molasses buckets with a lid on it, and it had a handle. So they said they would wrap the handle with cloth so it was easy on the dog's mouth, and he'd pick it up and take it out to my father in the field for water. You know, the farm dogs, they were always very important. In so many pictures you see the dog sitting down beside him, and they said that's the way I learned to walk. I held on to the back of the dog while I was walking, and even that was another crop my mother had. She bred and sold Dachshund dogs, so little Dachshund puppies. I think in her time of selling them, it was like 400 Dachshund puppies she sold. So, you know, it was all good for a kid growing up on the farm. The little animals you got to play with, and like I said, I don't know what other kids did that didn't have the farm experience. You know what they did to keep themselves busy, but. I know one thing, it sounds funny. My father would haul what he called slop from distilleries, and it was the mash left over from the brewing process, and that the hogs loved that. And that was one of the things. He would go to the local distilleries that were around here, but toward the end he would go down to the center of Baltimore. So that was a thing that I would go with him to keep him company when I was a little kid. And after he did his farm work, his milking, and had supper, then we went to Baltimore, and I'd go to sleep on the front seat of the car, or of the truck. And he had this big tank strapped to the back of the truck, and he'd bring that home. That was another source of food for the animals. You know, I don't know what else, you know, he said. It was, back in his time, the local church was pretty much your social activity, and not only your local church, but you went to neighboring churches for their different functions. And when he was younger, he was a member of the Westminster Band, and then he stopped for a while, and then in his older years, he went back to playing with the band. I don't know, that's pretty much all I can specifically remember, but it just, you know, it was a good experience for a kid. My father, after my mother passed away, my father sold the farm. Well, he sold the woodlot. It was 30-some acres woodlot, and he sold that to a sawmill, and they cut out the big trees, and then they sold it, I think, 5 or 6 large lots. And then the rest of the ground is in farmland and meadow. And it's being very well taken care of, which, even though I'm not there anymore, it just makes you feel good when I ride past every day to see how well it's being taken care of.
Has that area changed a lot over the years?
Oh, goodness. Well, all around the farm are big houses being built. I mean, behind the farm and in front of it and everything. But I understand the farm itself is in agricultural preservation, so that's a good thing. And like I said, it's being well taken care of, so that's, it makes you feel better, me feel better, even though it's not mine anymore, or I'm not involved in it. But, yeah. Like I said, the old stone house is still standing there. It's not looking too good, but I remember my father taking me in it. he had his blacksmith shop in the basement of it, and I remember him telling me had been built over a spring, so that if they were attacked by the Indians, they'd have water and they didn't have to go out. So I guess that was probably true. I don't know, but it was. When I was a kid, it was kind of scary for me. There were snakes in that house, But it's still standing, and like I said, it was on a surveyor's map in 1828, so it's it's old. But
And in your family that whole time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, it's like I said, my great grandfather had gotten it from his grandfather and grandmother. His name was Elias Arnold, and he got it from his grandparents, who were Elias brothers and Belinda brothers. So it's been in the family for a long time. But growing up for a kid was a good life, on a farm. Other than I didn't have kids, but to play with. But on the weekends we go to the other grandfather's, who was a dairy farmer down close to Hood's Mill. He was Benjamin Floor. And I'd see my cousins, so, that was okay. And I'd have my teenage girlfriends there. We'd have a picnic in the meadow, go fishing, and like I said, I just can't imagine what kids did who didn't have that experience and freedom, I guess, to walk out of the house and do things. And like I said, I was able to have a riding horse, which some of the other kids weren't able to do. And I had a couple other friends who also had riding horses, and they were more down toward the Sandy Mount area. And in the summertime, we would visit each other back and forth on the horses. In fact, we ride up the median strip of 140. I don't think you'd want to do that now. But I don't know, it was a hard life for the adults, because it seemed like the women, food production was just a continuous thing all day long. I mean, you got breakfast over with, and the middle meal was not lunch, it was dinner. And it was a big meal. So if my mother was out in the field working with my father, she came in, it wasn't time to relax, it was time to get that food on the table. And by the time you got done that, you were thinking about supper. So it just was a continual food production of some kind to keep everyone fed, and but I don't know, that was my life, and for a kid there was a lot of benefits there. It's just the older people, I mean, they were picking tomatoes that were taken to the cannery, and we even grew turnips, sold to the A&P store in town, the grocery store. And it was all kinds of little money-making situations, whatever could be. My father, I think before I was born, grew worm seed, which was a big cash crop around here. He even tried his hand at tobacco. I don't know how that worked out, but it was different. I think he planted soybeans toward the end. He even went out and did custom spraying, as he said. Spittle beetles were big for a while, and he had a sprayer on his tractor, and he would go and spray the other farmers' fields. And then, of course, he, like a lot of farmers even today, you need something else going on to bring in money. So he became a substitute rural mail carrier on 2 routes, and that kept him pretty busy, especially at Christmas time. When he did his mail route, then my mother would do the milking in the morning because he wasn't there.
How many cows were we talking?
About 12, I think, usually was the amount. And he would go into the post office early, like 4 o'clock in the morning, because he wasn't as used to sorting the mail. Back then, they sorted their own mail. And he wasn't as used to it, so he'd rather get there early to get the job out, done so he could leave. So he would go early, and she would take care of the farm, the barn chores, so he could do that. And then even my mother and grandmother did little part-time jobs sometimes. They went to the neighbor and helped with dressing turkeys at Christmas and Thanksgiving time, and some other little things that they got into, but predominantly they were busy on the farm. I mean, they canned, my mother pressure canned. Then when freezers came around, they got a freezer and they froze. But it was just major food production all the time, one way or another. She made butter and sold at times, when I was younger. I don't know, jellies, preserves, sauerkraut. It was all made at home. Like I said, you didn't get anything from any place else other than maybe a little fresh fruit it was a big deal to get oranges in the wintertime, and they bought sugar and salt, but not much else. I mean, that was pretty much everything came from the farm, or you didn't have it. So I don't know what else I remember, other than I know when I was first asked to do this, I was a little reluctant, but the more I thought about it, I thought this is really kind of neat. I started remembering things that I hadn't remembered for a long time, and I don't know that farming is going to be except for the farms that are in agriculture preservation, they're going by the wayside, so I'm not sure people will remember much of this anymore. So it's a good thing to record some things and for people to know, because I don't know if my grandkids will look back on their iPods with as much nostalgia as we do about farm life or not. Somehow, I just don't know. But no, it was a good life, and like I said, the most thing that I remember is how self-reliant people were, and it wasn't only my family. That's the way it was. You just did your thing. You didn't rely on anybody else to help you out. And like I said, my father was very seldom did we have anybody to help. I think he had someone help pick tomatoes one time, but he was pretty much my father. He was a very strong man. I know when we had to settle his estate or whatever, he had moved to a house right up the road after he sold the farm, and took 3 men to take down something that one man had put up in the garage. So like I said, he was a lifelong learner. He wanted to always learn something new. He was ready for a class, whether it was CPR or whatever else. He loved to be a member of the fire company. That was a big thing for him. I don't know, it's about all I can remember to tell you.
Well, we really appreciate you coming. Thanks so much for sharing your story.
Oh, you're certainly welcome.